what's going to happen with the IRGC now? I mean, they've survived, but they're weaker.
It's particularly sad because the IRGC is becoming more and more influential, and even before the war, Iran was almost as much a military dictatorship as it was a theocracy. The 2-week ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran, called for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz in return for a ceasefire, but the Iranians insisted that included Lebanon, which the Israelis and the Americans said it did not. Now, the Pakistani mediators, who you should know, said, Lebanon was included. Netanyahu knows this, that we do. The U.S. does have the power to get Israel to halt its attacks on Lebanon and other things. Indeed, to withdraw from Lebanon.
Welcome to FO Talks. With me is Professor Stephen Zunes again. He is a professor at the University of San Francisco, and he has been regularly speaking to us about Iran, Israel, and the Middle East. You can follow Professor Zunes' work on his Substack that is linked below. Welcome, Professor Zunes.
Good to be with you again.
Okay, so we've spoken extensively about the war in Iran. You've told us about how Iran's regime stands tall and how they've used this asymmetric warfare to kind of hold their ground. We've now got a ceasefire. However, during this ceasefire, Israel did not stop bombing Lebanon. Why do you think that is the case? Israel says they're hitting Hezbollah, but we've seen them hit residential buildings in South Lebanon, even in Beirut. So what is happening with Israel?
Well, so they are continuing to use the tactics that they've used in Gaza, and they've used in Lebanon in previous invasions in 1982 and 2006, to somewhat lesser extent last year, or 2014. But this really is, takes things to a whole new level in terms of human suffering. We're talking about 1.2 million displaced people out of a country of 5 million. That's a huge percentage. And the occupation of southern Lebanon is particularly devastating because they appear to have been systematically leveling entire towns and villages. These are beautiful places. I visited there. They've been there for hundreds of years. And these are not buildings damaged in firefights. This is controlled demolitions. I mean, again, very similar to what we've seen in Gaza. And pretty much everybody has been, the huge section of the population has been evacuated. They seem to be particularly targeting Shia villages and Shia neighborhoods. And the line that, we're just targeting Hezbollah targets. Well, remember, Hezbollah, plays a quasi-governmental role in much of South Lebanon and in certain Shia neighborhoods in Beirut. The Lebanese government is pretty corrupt and inept at providing basic services to their citizens. So Hezbollah has filled that gap, and so medical workers have been targeted because they work for Hezbollah-related health agencies, but that does not make them terrorists. The war crimes committed by Israel are quite severe, and as we saw in Gaza, has primarily impacted the civilian population.
Right. Before we get into Israel's military action in Lebanon, and not just military action, even their political goals, I want you to just briefly tell us about Hezbollah, because when October 7, 2023 happened, of course, Hamas attacked Israel, but Israel was also attacked by Hezbollah. There was thousands of rockets that were fired from southern Lebanon into Israel. So yes, of course, Israel had the right to defend itself and attack Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we also know that they took out Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah. In fact, the visuals of Israeli fighter jets going overhead, the Lebanese people, when Hassan Nasrallah's funeral was being conducted, was impressive, to say the least. So now that we know that Hezbollah's leadership has been taken out, and of course everyone remembers those pager attacks where almost 2,000 Hezbollah fighters were severely injured, who's even controlling the group. Who's keeping the group alive? Does Hezbollah have the same strategy as the IRGC, where they've decentralized everything? Or do you think Iran is still actively supporting Hezbollah in some way?
Well, first, let me mention about the origins of Hezbollah. It was a direct result of the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon in 1982. And here's the irony. They're saying we have to occupy southern Lebanon to fight Hezbollah, which came into existence because they occupied southern Lebanon. Just as ISIS was an outgrowth of the U.S. occupation of Iraq, kinds of invasions, occupation, air wars that primarily target the civilian population breeds its own resistance, and often more and more extreme. Now, traditionally, the politics in Lebanon has, based on the French system they set up of divide and rule, is based on religious identification, and so all the parties are kind of sectarian. They're often led by the son or grandson of the previous leaders. There's almost a feudalistic kind of system. The Shias, the party was known as a Mal, but they're also kind of elite led. But as a result of the Israeli occupation, Hezbollah rose up to fight Israel. And unlike the other so-called Muslim parties in Lebanon, that this was the Hezbollah was indeed very rooted in their interpretation of the Shia Islamic faith. They're pretty reactionary, similar to what we see in Iran. But they got popular support because they were a grassroots movement, in a sense that they're a populist movement. They said, we're tired of this old elite politics. We're going to stand up for you. And the Shias are the largest of the religious groups in Lebanon, but the least powerful of the three major groups. They never had the presidency or the prime ministership, and they're also the poorest of the three. And so, they were very open to this kind of right-wing populist, faith-based movement that emerged. And not just to resist the Israeli occupation, but to stick up for Shia rights and provide the kind of social services. They also successfully, finally pushed Israel out of Lebanon in 2000, after years of cross-border shelling and the like. And the border actually has remained fairly quiet. Hezbollah has only attacked Israel after Israel, has attacked an ally, such as Hamas and Iran. Otherwise, they have not attacked Israel. But they have a lot of support. Had a lot of support in Lebanon when they fought the Israelis. I mean, even after the 2006 war, polls showed huge margins of Lebanese or pro-Hezbollah, even the non-Shias. However, they kind of lost that support when they started throwing their weight around in Lebanese politics, having this militia, this armed group within the state, and they really alienated a lot of people when they ended up sending their fighters to Syria to support Assad and his brutal repression against the Syrian revolution. So they are not well appreciated in many parts of Lebanon, yet yet they still provide a lot of these basic services, and they still have a strong network, and they still have leaders that can replace those that Israel has killed.
Right. And we're recording on the 16th of April, and US President Donald Trump has announced that Israel and Lebanon will have a 10-day ceasefire. This is in the backdrop of the peace talks with Iran that Pakistan is mediating. And when these peace talks began, Pakistan didn't, of course, invite Israel to the Islamabad talks, because Islamabad says that they don't recognize Israel as a country. So the talks were only between the United States and Iran, being mediated by Pakistan. And today, on the 16th of April, as we're speaking, yes, Trump has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, which had become a sticking point for Pakistan when the mediations were happening, because Israel was carrying out airstrikes in Lebanon. But not just that, Israeli ministers, for example, the foreign minister, Israel Katz, and then Ben Gvir, were hinting that, yes, Israeli troops are in southern Lebanon. Yes, they plan to be up till the Litani River. And no, they have no intentions of leaving the area, because they're saying, Israel is claiming that they need to be there to eliminate Hezbollah. Now, many people have written about this, and it's called the Greater Israel Project. And a lot of Israelis, of course, approve of it. So what is this Greater Israel Project, and is expanding the map of Israel into Lebanon, into Syria, a part of it?
Well, yeah, Israel, in addition to its occupation of Palestinian territories, has invaded and occupied the Golan region in southwestern Syria, formerly annexed it to Israel in the face of unanimous UN Security Council resolution calling it null and void. Trump, however, made the United States the first and so far only country that has formally recognized this illegal annexation. Biden refused to reverse it, even as he was pontificating about the illegality of Russia expanding its territory by force and its invasion of Ukraine. And the Golan has enormous amount of water resources, and Israel's been bringing in settlers. They ethnically cleansed the overwhelming majority of Syrians in that territory, and only 5 Jews villages remain. In terms of southern Lebanon, many people see Israel has the same idea, a fertile region, good water resources, and they've all, at this point, they have ethnically cleansed the vast majority of the population. And this is but of course, the irony of these kinds of things is that it's not about security. I mean, Hezbollah has long range missiles that can strike Israel from areas beyond the Litani River. Unlike Hamas, most of their rockets were kind of homemade machine shops, but Hezbollah has received fairly sophisticated missiles from Iran. Their ties with Iran are much closer than Hamas's ever was. Indeed, Hamas was on the opposite side in the Syrian civil war. But one has to see this not in the context of Israel's just defending itself by creating this wide buffer zone, but very much part of the expansionist agenda we have seen in some of the right-wing Zionist elements within Israel from the very beginning.
Right. So, Professor Zunes, I was actually speaking to a former RAF pilot, a former British pilot, Peter Hoskins, who spoke to Fair Observer. He took part in the first Gulf War, and he was kind of explaining how an air campaign can never really be successful in regime change on the ground, if that is one of the political goals. Of course, when Israel and the United States launched the attack on Iran, that was one of the conditions. That was one of their political goals. It was regime change. It was preventing Iran from enriching more nuclear material, and of course, removing the IRGC. Neither of that has really happened. The IRGC is weak, but it still stands. Iran's nuclear material is still in the country. In fact, Iran has gone ahead and blocked the Strait of Hormuz. They've got more leverage now. They can inflict more economic pain across the world. So it looks like, yes, Trump and Netanyahu have been backed into a corner, and which is why we're probably seeing these ceasefire talks happening. But do you think that is something that Israel really wants? Because A, they've not been included in these talks, and B, for at least for Netanyahu, if the notion had been set that he wants the wars to keep going on to ensure his political survival. So do you think he would want to continue doing that even as ceasefire and mediation talks happen right now?
Well, certainly Netanyahu would like wars to continue to keep him out of jail, to the corruption charges and everything else. I mean, this is something that people talk up very openly about in Israel. What is interesting to see in terms of the ceasefire in Lebanon is that was the big obstacle in reopening the Strait, because the 2-week ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran, called for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz in return for a ceasefire, but the Iranians insisted that included Lebanon, which the Israelis and the Americans said it did not. Now, the Pakistani mediators, who you should know, said, Lebanon was included. And so this whole thing we've had this past week about Trump sending in the Navy to increase the closure to include Iranian ships and others, was a result of Israel's refusal to abide by what was apparently the ceasefire agreement. And so, all Trump needed to do was to, instead of blocking the Strait and cause even more economic harm, particularly in Asia and other places that are dependent on Iranian oil and other supplies, would have been to tell Netanyahu to stop the war in Lebanon. Now, perhaps this is exactly what has happened. Perhaps this is why Netanyahu apparently has agreed, to this ceasefire. And if that's the case, maybe the Strait is going to be reopened shortly. But I'm sure there are going to be serious disagreements on a number of issues, including the fact that Iran, that has been demanding reparations for all the damage done by the U.S. and Israel, and not getting that, said, well, we'll charge tolls until we get enough money to make up for the reparations we're not getting to rebuild. I mean, there are many issues still to deal with regarding a passage on the Strait, but this could potentially get rid of one of the biggest obstacles to the closure of the Strait and to the overall ceasefire between the United States and Iran.
Well, Professor Zunes, the scenario that you're describing that can eventually lead to opening of the Strait is not something that Israel would be on board with, especially Netanyahu. And it's not just them. I believe even the UAE is unhappy with this ceasefire because they're now left vulnerable. Of course, they've been severely affected. It's not just the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, they've all been affected because the Strait has been closed. And the leadership in UAE is still urging the United States to go ahead and complete whatever they have started, because Israel and the UAE are saying that the IRGC is still alive. And if the ceasefire stands now, nothing really has been achieved. In fact, there could be a major blowback in Israel and the UAE for starting and for being on the side of the Americans when this war began. So they would not really be on board with this.
Well, regarding Israel, the United States certainly has the power to stop Israel from further aggression in Lebanon. We saw Presidents Carter and President Reagan and others have basically been able to get Israel to halt these kinds of attacks, because they're very dependent on U.S. aid. I mean, just on Wednesday, there is a resolution in the Senate to block sending additional bombs to Israel, as well as the bulldozers that are being used to level so many thousands of Palestinian homes. It was defeated, but it had the support of 80% of the Senate Democrats. That's unprecedented. So there's growing upset in the United States. We're spending billions of dollars every year to support Israel engaging in these kind of war crimes. Netanyahu knows this. That we do. U.S. does have the power to get Israel to halt its attacks on Lebanon and other things. Indeed, to withdraw from Lebanon. I mean, there was been U.S. pressure led to some previous withdrawals. Now, in terms of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia has always been pretty hawkish, but there had actually been some rapprochement with Iran the past couple of years prior to the war, and my sense is that at least the smaller Emirates were very upset at the war, U.S. and Israeli war, because they weren't informed about it, they weren't able to prepare, and as anybody predicted, that they would then become targets themselves. Now, the fact that Iran has gone beyond attacking U.S. bases, which they had a right to do since the U.S. attacked them, but going after the infrastructure of these countries as well, has put them back in a more hawkish anti-Iranian position. If there is hope that by the Iranians this would get them the pressure U.S. to stop, it's had the opposite effect in many respects. At the same time, the bottom line for them is to reopen the Strait. Because it's not just the exporting of oil; it's the importing of the basic needs that these countries have. So they've been and they need to rebuild because if the war resumes, they're going to start receiving rockets and drones from the Iranian side of the Gulf again. So my sense is that they would be more open to a more permanent ceasefire, even if it left the Iranian regime intact, because again, this has been a very, very difficult month and a half for them.
You're absolutely correct that despite Saudi Arabia being hawkish and trying to portray itself as the leader of the Arab world, yes, they have been rapprochement with Iran, and partly because of the Chinese coming in and facilitating that meeting. But what I want to talk about is, in case the ceasefire holds, and not just the one in Iran, but the one in Lebanon as well, that basically means that Benjamin Netanyahu's political career is it's finished. He is already facing multiple charges for corruption. There is growing discontent with his government, and his popularity ratings are going down. In fact, when the war with Iran began, almost 80% of Israelis did support it, but that has slowly gone down because there is fatigue in the Israeli community as well. They're constantly running to bomb shelters. They're constantly being bombarded with sirens at night. So there is growing fatigue in Israel against Bibi Netanyahu's government. And if the ceasefire does hold, it's most likely it's the end of his political career. Do you think he will turn the battlefield somewhere else to ensure that there is still more right-wing support for him? There is still support for his military actions. Do you think we could see a sector opening up in Syria, or maybe he increases the military action in Gaza? What do you think he will be doing?
It's hard to predict. He is kind of backed in a corner in certain ways, and he knows he has a blank check from the United States. Even under Biden, war crimes that, by most knowledgeable observers, constituted violations of the Genocide Treaty. The U.S. was still sending unconditional aid, vetoing UN Security Council resolutions, and Trump's backing for Netanyahu is even stronger. At the same time, if there are any actions that end up hurting U.S. interest, in the sense that it continues to lead to the closure of the Strait and other threats against American interest, Trump can certainly say no. You can't do this. I mean, I think there's a sense, especially outside the United States, that there's kind of this tail wagging the dog thing for Israel. And certainly Israel has a strong network of supporters. Everybody's heard of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, that's created a climate of intimidation on Capitol Hill. But public opinion in the United States right now is overwhelmingly critical of Israel and of AIPAC. And that I think the power that they have is only as much as it happens to coincide with perceived interest by the United States. That if no president, even Trump, is going to compromise what he sees as American interests for the sake of Israel.
Right. Okay. Finally, let's talk about US President Donald Trump, because if this ceasefire holds, he's not staring at a happy political career either. He's got midterms in November. He is seeing his approval ratings drop. In fact, a lot of Gen Z in the US are calling this the Epstein War, because they say that suddenly nobody's talking about the Epstein files because the war in Iran began. And it began very conveniently when things were heating up regarding the Epstein files. So there is a lot of discontent against U.S. President Donald Trump as well. The number of not miking protests are increasing across the country. MAGA is severely split. There is two factions in MAGA now: one that is supporting Israel and one that is questioning American support, unabated support to Israel. So, if there is a ceasefire? Trump is definitely going to be on the spot, because people are going to question him. What did he really achieve? The Strait is blocked. It was open before the war. The IRGC is still in the country. Iran's nuclear enrichment material, Iran's nuclear material is still in the country. So what was the ultimate aim of this?
Of course, he's going to try to claim victory. I mean, already he claims with a ceasefire that he's ended war number 10. And he'll be giving himself great credit for having ended, the Iran war that he started. And we'll try to spin it in any way he can. That Iranian assets have been severely degraded. Much of the leadership, both the clerical leadership and the Revolutionary Guard, leadership, have been killed. But it's really hard to see it as any kind of victory, given that this kind of pressure, these kind of bombs, has not eliminated their nuclear program, has not gotten rid of their ability to fire missiles, and if anything, it strengthened the regime by strengthening the IRGC and the more hardline elements of the clerical leadership. It's very spent as a victory. I mean, even if the ceasefires of both Lebanon and Iran are permanent, just the disruption of the supply chains and everything else, it's going to be months and months and months for the economies to recover. And so this is not going to look good on Trump, on top of all the other things, and by extension on the Republican Party. I mean, it's interesting in that vote on Wednesday regarding the additional aid to Israel. 70% of Jewish Democratic senators voted for the bill to restrict the aid, whereas 100% of the Christian Republican senators, and all Republican senators are Christian, voted against it. And I think that this is a very unpopular position, even with Republicans. And so I think we're going to really find that these the issues regarding Israel, regarding Iran, regarding the economic impact are going to be factors in the midterm elections. And on top of everything else, it's not going to go well for the Republicans. Okay.
And very quickly, before we wrap this up, what's going to happen with the IRGC now? I mean, they've survived, but they're weaker. Before this war began in January, there were mass protests against the regime, and they ended up killing thousands of their own people. But they've survived this, and now they've got more support, because people are actually rallying behind the IRGC. They're rallying behind the government. They're rallying behind the regime. So it looks like from here on out, if the ceasefire stands, the IRGC is going to emerge as much stronger, younger, more radical, and Iran could possibly be the dominating the regional power, because they know that they can close the Strait anytime. And of course, the other Arab countries have been weakened because they were relying heavily on the United States, and the United States has been hit. A lot of their military equipment has been damaged. So Iran could emerge the winner over here.
Yeah, very much so, and it's particularly sad because the IRGC is becoming more and more is becoming more and more influential. And even before the war, Iran was almost as much a military dictatorship as it was a theocracy. But this even strengthened, their power. They will, emerge and be able to twist this as a great victory despite the enormous damage. And it's going to be a long time, for people to kind of recover and regroup and hopefully create another movement that could seriously challenge their power. But it's going to be a long time. The pro-democracy movement has definitely been hurt very badly about this. People rally around the flag when they're being bombed, as you noted, and because ultimately regime change, and that's a noble goal when it comes to Iran. It's a terrible, repressive, reactionary regime. It's really got to go. But it's going to be the people who did it. Let's remember that it wasn't NATO that brought down communism in Eastern Europe. It was Polish shipyard workers, Czech intellectuals, East German church people, Estonian folk singers. It wasn't the armed. Indeed, it wasn't NATO bombing in Serbia that brought down Milosevic. It was the young students of Otpor who rose up and overthrew that regime. And I could go on, but the real change has to come from below, and that is that's really the only hope for Iran. We're not going, no matter how many bombs we drop. It will only strengthen the reactionary currents there.
Thank you, Professor Zunes, again for speaking to Fair Observer. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.